Hi, class. This is the chapter about the human body, and we are going to talk about all parts of the human body. It will be slightly abbreviated because, this is only such a in-depth class, but it's really interesting to learn about the human body and all the miraculous and amazing things that it can do. So here's an outline of what we'll be talking about today. Some terms: tissues, organs, and organ systems. Tissues are collections of cells that are adapted to perform specific functions. Organs are a group of tissues designed to perform a specific function, for example, the heart. Organ system is a collection of organs that work together to perform an overall function. For example, the circulatory system, which moves oxygen and nutrients as well as blood throughout our body. The cell. So the cell is the very basic structure of our body and really the basic structure of all life. And living organisms have many different kinds of cells. In the human body, all of the cells have very similar features, and they have different organelles, or almost like organs of the cells. And we're going to talk about some of the organelles coming up. Cell membrane. This is also called the plasma membrane, and this is the outer part of the cell that holds all of the contents together. So the cell membrane maintains all of the organelles within the cell and helps cells communicate with each other. The cell membrane is made of phospholipids and cholesterol. It's fat soluble. And so the cholesterol adds rigidity to the cell membrane. Cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the fluid material and organelles within the cell. It does not include the nucleus. A little bit of energy metabolism can be produced here. So a small amount of energy can be produced by the cytoplasm. And this is actually called anaerobic metabolism. So this is where energy can be produced in the absence of oxygen. Mitochondria. While a little bit of energy can be produced in the cytoplasm, the mitochondria are what we really consider the powerhouses of the cell. These organelles are capable of converting food energy into energy-yielding nutrients to a form of energy that our cells can use. So they're capable of creating ATP. And this is an aerobic process, meaning it uses water, and it may use some enzymes and vitamins and minerals. So these are the main energy producers within the cell. Cell nucleus. This is the DNA, where the DNA is stored. And the DNA is the code book that contains directions for making substances that the cell needs. So specifically, the DNA tells us how to make proteins and which amino acids to put in which order to make those proteins. Cell metabolism. Metabolism is the entire collection of chemical processes involved in maintaining life. It includes the sequences of chemical reactions in the cells. These reactions take place in the cytoplasm and the organelles that we discussed. They help us release and use energy from foods. They can help us make one substance from another, and they can help us prepare waste products for excretion. There are two main types of metabolic reactions. There are catabolic and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions take molecules apart and release energy, and anabolic reactions combine molecules together and usually use energy. So anabolism is a building reaction. Catabolism is a breaking reaction. What tissues are in the human body? There are four main types of tissue within the human body. Epithelial tissues are cells that line the outside of the body and all the external passages within it, such as our skin. Connective tissue is a protein tissue that holds different structures of our body together. For example, tendons and cartilage. Connective tissue also helps form part of the bone. Muscle tissue, I think you guys know what your muscle is, but muscle allows us to move. And then nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is composed of highly branched, elongated cells, and nervous tissue can transport nerve impulses from one end of the body to the other. So tissues are used to create organs, and organs create systems. One such system is the cardiovascular system. And the cardiovascular system is the system that is used to exchange nutrients, oxygen, and waste between our cells and our blood. So we're able to transport oxygen around our blood, transport vitamins, minerals, energy through the blood, and get rid of carbon dioxide, which is one of our waste products, through our blood. This is a really good video just summarizing the cardiovascular system. Capillaries. Capillaries are the tiniest blood vessels in our cardiovascular system. And where the capillaries are is actually at kind of the intersection of our arteries and our veins. So capillaries help facilitate nutrient exchange within our cells. Portal circulation in the GI tract. So when we eat different foods, nutrients are primarily absorbed in the stomach and small intestine, really mostly in the small intestine. And these nutrients travel through the portal circulation to the liver. They travel through portal circulation to the hepatic portal vein, which goes to the liver, and then the liver breaks down nutrients. There is an additional system of transport in our body and an additional kind of circulatory system, and it's called the lymphatic system, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. Water-soluble nutrients and small fats are transported through the portal circulation. So the lymphatic system, I highly recommend you watch this video, but the lymphatic system consists of a network of lymphatic vessels and the lymph fluid that moves through them. The lymph vessels can take up excess fluid that collects between the cells and return it to the bloodstream. Lymph is kind of similar to blood. Lymph can collect in nodes around the body, and the nodes are like little filters to clean the lymphatic fluid. The lymph is also how we carry our fat-soluble vitamins and our large fats. So lymph is how we carry our fats. I just said that. This begins when VLDL particles created by the liver, take that back. This begins when chylomicrons created by intestinal cells enter the lymphatic system and then circulate through the lymph until they're eventually deposited in the bloodstream near the heart. Urinary system. The urinary system is composed of the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and then the urethra, which we use to get rid of the urine or to pass urine out of the body. And the urinary system helps us get rid of wastes as well as excess fluid and balance water within our body. Kidneys have many functions besides just producing urine. The kidneys are also involved in pH balance or acid-base balance of the body. So just like the lungs, they can help with pH balance. They also convert vitamin D into its active form, and they produce hormones. One of the hormones is called erythropoiesis, which can create red blood cells. The kidneys can produce glucose from certain amino acids. The kidneys can regulate blood pressure, and they have many, many more functions. Nervous system. Nervous system is a regulatory system that controls our body functions, and the nervous system can detect very small changes occurring in various organs and the environment and initiate a response or a corrective action to maintain a constant body environment or to protect us if there's external threats. The nervous system regulates activities that can change instantly. For example, muscle contraction, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and we have many nerve receptors. The basic structural unit of the nervous system is a neuron, and neurons are very branched cells. We're going to see some coming up, and we have about 100 billion neurons. Neurons allow us to perceive what is going on in the environment. And neurons communicate with each other through sending chemical messengers. The The chemical messengers have to be sent between receptors, and there are different transmissions of these chemical messengers between different neurons in the body. Why do we care? Because this all relies on sodium and potassium in the neuron. To start, there is an influx of sodium into the neuron and a loss of potassium as the message is sent. Then levels are restored after the signal passes and it is ready to conduct another message. So the message that neurons send between one another must cross a gap or a synapse between two different neurons. And it's usually converted into a chemical signal called a neurotransmitter to be able to do that. Endocrine system. The endocrine system consists of various glands and organs that can secrete hormones. And so the endocrine system has to do with hormone secretion. Example hormones are insulin. These are produced by the pancreas. Additional example, growth hormone produced by the pituitary gland, which is in the brain, and glucagon, another hormone that's kind of opposite to insulin, also produced by the pancreas. This is a picture of the pancreas and the cells within the pancreas. The pancreas has some cells called beta cells, and those beta cells can release insulin into the bloodstream, which can help us uptake glucose. The immune system. So I think you guys have all heard of your immune systems, but the immune system helps protect us from disease and infection. And there are two types of immunity. So there's non-specific and specific immunity. Non-specific immunity is considered innate immunity because this is some of the immune functions that we're born with, so such as chemical and physical barriers. A physical barrier would be our skin. A chemical barrier would be inflammation or the inflammatory response. We also have white blood cells that can engulf microorganisms. The intestinal cells have cells that are part of the immune system. And so, yeah, the non-specific immunity is immunity that we're born with or that we're able to produce right off the bat. Sorry, I kind of went too fast there. Specific immunity is immunity that we can develop. So if our non-specific immune defenses are unable to block a microorganism's entry into the blood, our immune system will try to identify and destroy that invader when it hits our blood. And so specific immunity involves the process where certain blood cells produce antibodies that target specific microorganisms or foreign proteins, which we call antigens. And after this happens once, when we're first exposed to an antigen, we create a memory of what that antibody looked like so that we can produce it again in the future, but more rapidly. Nutrients needed for immunity. There are many nutrients that are consistently needed for immunity because our immune cells actually turn over very, very quickly. That means they die and we produce new ones very quickly, some of them within a few hours or days. And so since we're constantly making new cells, resynthesizing cells, we need adequate nutrients to be able to do that. And these are some of the nutrients that are required. The digestive system. Holy moly, this is quite a diagram. We're going to go over all these parts of the digestive system and how they work coming up. But digestion starts in the mouth and it ends at the rectum or the anus. And basically the human body is a tube for nutrients to go through. And as nutrients move through, we have different enzymes, different acids, different mechanical, physical structures that can help break down and process those foods. So digestion, process by which large ingested molecules are mechanically and chemically broken down to produce basic nutrients that can be absorbed. And absorption is the process where these substances are actually passed from that intestinal tract or the GI tract, the stomach, directly into the bloodstream or lymph. So how we get food we eat into our bloodstream. Digestion. Digestion includes mechanical and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion would involve muscular contractions of the GI tract and motility with different movements of our GI tract, such as peristalsis. Mechanical digestion could also involve chewing our foods in the mouth. That exposes our foods to more enzymes, creates a larger surface area. Chemical digestion involves chemicals our body creates and produces to help break down foods. So acids and enzymes secreted in the GI tract. Our stomach makes hydrochloric acid. Enzymes are substances that only work on specific molecules. So each enzyme is specific for a different component in food. And enzymes can be destroyed by changes in temperature or pH. How do enzymes work? So enzymes are molecules that help speed up chemical reactions. And in the case of digestion, enzymes generally split apart food, particles of our food, not whole particles of our food, but components of our food, such as fat, carbohydrates, or triglycerides. So in this example, you see sucrose, which is a type of sugar, and sucrose is composed of a glucose and a fructose. A bond holds that sucrose together. When an enzyme attaches to that bond, the enzyme is able to use water and hydrolyze that bond. So it adds water to that chemical bond, and you can break apart those two molecules into a single glucose and a single fructose. Then the enzyme detaches and can be used again. Important secretions of the GI tract. These are some important secretions of the GI tract. Amylase and lipase are both enzymes. Enzymes are usually named with ASE at the end, and then the first part of the enzyme indicates what is digested. So amylase digests amylose, lipase digests lipids. Bile is something secreted by the liver. It's stored in the gallbladder, and it helps emulsify and break down fats. Intrinsic factor is something key to B12, vitamin B12 absorption. Bicarbonate is secreted by the pancreas and helps neutralize acidic chyme coming from the stomach. And the stomach acid is hydrochloric acid that helps break down proteins and digest foods. Mouth. What does the mouth do? The mouth chews, it breaks up particles, it tastes, it helps us talk. There's saliva in our mouth that lubricates food. Movement of food down the GI tract. When we chew food, we form food into what's called a bolus. That bolus then passes through our esophagus into our stomach. However, a very important step as the bolus passes from our esophagus to our stomach is that this very, very small structure called the epiglottis covers the trachea. Because if the epiglottis did not cover the trachea, it's possible that food could go inside the trachea, and the trachea leads to our lungs. So that would be bad. But in normal swallowing, the epiglottis does cover the trachea and makes food instead go to the stomach, down the esophagus to the stomach, and then we don't choke, which is nice to not choke. Okay. Lower esophageal sphincter. So this is kind of a bad picture, but food will move down the esophagus via peristaltic motion, or kind of contractions that move food forward in muscular waves. And then when it hits the stomach, it meets something called the lower esophageal sphincter. And this is a sphincter, or a circular muscle that closes or constricts after food enters the stomach. And this way food stays in the stomach and doesn't come back up. Our stomach is very acidic, and there's acid in our stomach, so we don't want that acid coming back up and splashing into the esophagus. The stomach is a large organ, and it can hold about 4 cups of food for many hours. Food is mixed in the stomach, both mechanically and also There's chemicals in the stomach that help break down food. So the stomach physically kind of acts like a blender and mixes food. There is hydrochloric acid, which will destroy proteins and convert enzymes to their active form. It will allow minerals to be soluble so they can be absorbed. And the stomach has many folds called rugae on it. And inside these folds are crypts, or kind of, I don't know, you could call them, can't really call them ducts, but they call them crypts. And in these crypts are many very important cells that secrete all of the things in the stomach, the hydrochloric acid, pepsin, etc. After the stomach, food will pass through the pyloric sphincter, which is a sphincter connecting the bottom of the stomach to the top of the small intestine, and will enter the small intestine. The small intestine is made up of, or kind of considered to have, three different parts. The first part is the duodenum, the second part is the jejunum, and the third part is the ileum. And in the small intestine, you have, again, folds along the wall of the small intestine. And on these folds, you have finger-like projections, which are called villi. The villi greatly expand the surface area of the small intestine so that the small intestine can meet with as many nutrients as possible, because nutrients are actually absorbed across the cells of the small intestine. On the villi, there are actually smaller structures called microvilli, and these are even smaller little finger-like projections that allow greater surface area of the intestine to contact food. I mentioned the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine, the jejunum the second, and the ileum the third. Most of the digestive enzymes enter at the site of the duodenum. Here's another picture of the intestinal cells just blown up. So you've got the villi, the finger-like projections, you have cells within the villi, and then you have microvilli on top of the villi. The villi are always moving, kind of like a sea anemone, and that helps them trap food and absorb food. And the combination of the villi and the microvilli expand the surface area of the small intestine 600 times. Absorption. So how are foods absorbed? There are 4 different ways that foods or nutrients can be absorbed. The first is passive diffusion, and this just has to do with differences in concentration gradients. And so if a molecule is more concentrated on one side of the cell than in the bloodstream, for instance, the molecule will leave that highly concentrated area and go to a less concentrated area. Facilitated diffusion is a similar concept, however, relies on a carrier protein to follow the concentration gradient. So it does follow concentration gradients, but it requires a protein. Active absorption needs a carrier protein as well as some energy. And then phagocytosis and pinocytosis is pictured here in this number 4. And that's when cells actually engulf different components and then kind of bulge out from the lining of the intestine, and those components are deposited into the cell. Absorption into the intestine. So water-soluble components are transported via the bloodstream. Fat-soluble components are transported via the lymph, and anything else goes out the end. So any undigestible food or anything we haven't digested, we excrete as our stool. Large intestine. The large intestine receives what's left after the small intestine has really absorbed and digested the majority of the food. However, some absorption still takes place in the small intestine. A little bit of water is absorbed here. Some electrolytes are absorbed here. Vitamin K, biotin, and some fatty acids can be absorbed here. This is where the stool is stored until it is expelled. The stool is primarily stored in the rectum until it is expelled. The large intestine is different from the small intestine because it doesn't have that big absorptive surface. There are no villi or microvilli. There are many bacteria in the small intestine. And in fact, there are so many bacteria there that the bacteria in our small intestine actually outnumber the cells in our body. The bacteria in the large intestine, sorry if I just said small, the bacteria in the large intestine contribute to what we call the microbiome, and this would be specifically the intestinal microbiome. And the majority of our microbiome is found in the intestine. The microbiome is a series of organisms that colonate our body, microorganisms, so bacteria that live within our body and actually have kind of symbiotic or helpful functions to our body. And we're learning more and more about the microbiome every day and its relationship to chronic disease, depression, weight gain, etc. Okay, so this is just a review slide to go over what is absorbed in which area of the GI tract. So the stomach, minimal absorption, alcohol, water, small intestine, majority of the absorption, and then large intestine. What about these other organs? So we have some organs that are considered accessory organs, and these include the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So these are not necessarily organs of the GI tract, but they're organs that play a very, very important role in the GI tract. The liver produces bile, and bile is necessary to break down fat into smaller droplets. Bile is stored in the gallbladder. The pancreas makes hormones, insulin, and glucagon, and it produces bicarbonate, which helps neutralize acidic chyme entering the small intestine, and it produces digestive enzymes that can break down food components in the small intestine. The gallbladder, like I said, stores and releases bile. The bile will emulsify fat. Okay, where do we store nutrients in our body? So once we have eaten, digested, and absorbed these nutrients, what happens to them? Fat, this is not exactly right. You can store any of your nutrients as fat if you eat too many. So protein, carbs, and fat can all be converted to fat if they're eaten in excess. But yeah, we'll get to that coming up. So fat can go to the adipose cells. Carbs can be converted to glycogen, which is stored in the muscle and liver. If we have too much glycogen, those carbs can be converted to fat. Glucose and amino acids circulate through the blood for our cells to take up and use in metabolic reactions and anabolic reactions. And vitamins and minerals mostly go to our liver and other sites, including our cells. Nutrition and genetics. So there are many diseases that have a genetic component. And because of this, nutrition can play a big role. They have seen with cardiovascular disease that about 1 out of every 500 people has a genetic component that puts them at higher risk for a certain amino acid called homocysteine, and this raises their level of cardiovascular disease or their risk for cardiovascular disease. With obesity, if you have an obese parent, you are more likely to be obese. There are actually obesity-related genes. Cancer definitely has a genetic component, and diabetes has a genetic component as well. But healthy diet and healthy lifestyle can help reduce your risk of developing these diseases and or slow down these diseases if you were to develop them anyways. So if you knew you were at risk for heart disease, you would want to eat as healthy as you could to reduce any additional risks that you might incur. This is an example of a family tree, and I do this project a lot in my classes where students actually look at their family history and their family history of disease and see who had what diseases and what they might be at risk for developing. And then they can make some recommendations on what kind of diet changes might help them reduce their risk of these chronic diseases. All right. In your book, there are many digestive diseases that we didn't have time to talk about, but do read about them. They're very interesting to know. And thanks for listening. Bye. Email me with any questions.